Hey everyone, it's Mostly Casual Commander, I'm BK. We have a variety matchup game for you, featuring some older commanders and some new ones. Chris is playing Nekusar, the Mind Razor. We love drawing cards, until we die by drawing cards. Next up we have Scott playing Sheldon the Commander, aka Ruhan of the Fomori. Scott's looking to enchant, equip, or cantrip his way to one-shot his opponents. Kyle is playing Bello, Bard of the Brambles. Bello will have him animate some of his big mana value permanents and smash his opponents. I'm having a lot of fun with Baylen, the Haymaker, so I'm running it back one more time. I want to flood the board with my tokens and then trample into my opponents. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around for an appearance from my fat cat, Meatball. He's so chunky. Chris starts us off with a Desolate Lighthouse, passing to Scott, who plays Scalding Tarn as his land for turn. He passes and cracks it, while Kyle plays a Command Tower into a Llanowar Elves. He passes over to me, and I draw and play a Jungle Shrine as my land for turn, before passing it back over to Chris. On his turn 2, he plays a Swamp as his land. He found a Talisman of Dominance and plays that, while Scott finds his land that he fetched with his Scalding Tarn. In this case, it's a Steam Vents, entering the battlefield tapped. Chris then passes the turn over to Scott, who draws for turn, and then he plays Cliff Top Retreat as his land. And he found a Talisman of his own, Talisman of Conviction. So he plays that before passing the turn back over to Kyle. He'll draw, and then he'll play a 3 Visits. With that, he'll go and find a forest card, putting it onto the battlefield. In this case, he finds an actual forest, entering the battlefield untapped. He then uses said forest to cast Utopia Sprawl upon it, and he'll gain red manas when he uses that. He then plays his land for turn as a mountain, before passing the turn back over to me. On my turn 2, I draw, I play a Plains, and then I cast a Gilded Goose, using my Jungle Shrine. I'll make a food token and pass the turn over to Chris. He'll draw, play a mountain as his land for turn. He'll get even more ramp with his Obelisk of Grixis. Now this guy's got 2 whole mana rocks, can you believe it? He passes over to Scott, who plays a Plains, and then he casts his commander, Sheldon the Commander. So, at the beginning of combat on his turn, he'll choose an opponent at random to attack. On Kyle's turn, he plays another mountain, and finds a Professional Facebreaker. He plays that, and aims to make a bunch of treasure tokens. He casts his commander, Bello, Bard of the Brambles, and then has to say go over to me. I draw and play a mountain as my land, then using my food and Gilded Goose, I play Keeper of the Accord, hoping to get caught back up with my mana and creature board state. I pass the turn to Chris, who plays a Polluted Delta as his land, then he casts his commander, Nekusar, the Mind Razor. So now when we draw cards, we'll get pinged. On Chris's end step, my Keeper of the Accord will trigger, seeing his lands, so I get to go find a Plains, entering the battlefield tapped. On to Scott's turn, he draws his cards, gets pinged by Nekusar, plays a Fabled Passage, then casts Ishai Ojutai Dragon Speaker. So now whenever an opponent casts spells, that thing gets bigger. He moves into combat, and I am randomly selected to get smashed into by Sheldon, taking 7 whole points of damage. Scott then passes the turn over to Kyle. He draws, takes his damage, plays a Mossfire Valley as his land. He then casts Rose, Cutthroat Raider. This will trigger Scott's Ishai, getting a +1 counter. Then Kyle moves into combat, attacking as many opponents as he can in order to trigger all of his things. And he does so successfully. So Rose says he can make 3 junk tokens. Professional Facebreaker says 3 treasure tokens. He gets to draw a card off of Bello, taking a damage from Nekusar. And let's not forget that Bello allowed Rose to attack because its mana value is 4 or greater, and it's an artifact. So hasty, indestructible, and triggered all of these things. Kyle starts cracking into his junk tokens, exiling the top card of his library, and Rose makes a red mana for each one that he does so. So he cracks all 3 of those bad boys, revealing 3 different cards. Then using that red mana, he casts Talisman of Impulse from one of the exiled cards that is junk token revealed. Using his Llanowar Elves, he casts a Bop, that beautiful Lord of the Rings artwork. He then lines up a well-sequenced play by using a red mana from Rose to cast Red Elemental Blast, targeting Nekusar on Chris's board. In response to that, Chris decides to crack into his Polluted Delta, taking 1. He then finds a land from his library, and in this case it's a Smoldering Marsh, which will enter the battlefield untapped. He then smiled and said, "Okay, it resolves, I didn't have anything." So the red elemental blast goes to Kyle's bin. He then casts Pinnacle Monk from exile, and this will allow him to return the red elemental blast to his hand. Not bad, Kyle. Not bad. He moves to end step. This will trigger my Keeper of the Accord, looking at his creatures as well as his land count. So I get a soldier as well as a plains enter the battlefield tapped. Onto my turn, I get to draw and play a Sundown Pass, hoping it would be a forest, but it's not. Therefore, I cast Kadama's Reach. So I'll go find 2 whole forests. I'll have one of those bad boys enter the battlefield tapped and 1 go to my hand. I'm still trying to get things set up, but it's moving a little bit slow for me. I move into combat, swinging my Keeper of the Accord at Kyle, smacking into him, dropping him to 34. I pass a turn, and Chris draws, playing Crumbling Necropolis as his land for turn. Then he casts Fevered Visions. He's going to ensure that we're drawing more cards and taking more damage. He casts a very pretty Commander Sphere, and with that in play, he'll pass the turn. This will trigger his Fevered Visions at his end step, so he'll draw a card. On Scott's turn, he draws, playing an Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, as his land. Afterwards, he casts Steel of the Godhead, targeting his commander, so he'll get a total of +2/+2, lifelink, and unblockable. He moves into combat. Kyle was randomly selected to be attacked by Sheldon, and before blocks, Kyle recasts that red elemental blast, targeting Sheldon. But Scott has a response of his own in the form of Long River's Pull. He decides to gift me a card, so I get to draw, and because he did so, he gets to hard counter that spell. So red elemental blast does nothing, and Scott's damage resolves against his opponents, smacking Kyle with a 9/9 commander, as well as hitting Chris in the air with a 10/10. And Scott gets to gain 9 whole life, going to 43. He then passes his turn. On his end step, Fevered Visions triggered. He draws and loses 2 life. On Kyle's turn, he draws and plays Unnatural Growth. Pretty much what Bello wants to see on the board here. After that, he immediately rolls into combat, attacking each one of us. Again, he's trying to optimize how many tokens he's going to make off of his attacks, as well as dealing damage. Scott and Chris just go ahead and take their damage, but I actually have a response before blocks are declared, in the form of Secure the Wastes, where X equals 2. I'm just trying to stem some of my bleeding right now because I'm moving slowly. I put all 3 of my tokens in front of his 2 attackers, one of them of course having Menace. So it wasn't exactly optimal for me to do that, but I did spare myself 12 points of damage at this stage in the game. I also stopped Professional Facebreaker from making 1 treasure, so what's up? Bello will still trigger, and Kyle gets to draw a card. He found a forest and plays that as his land. He then uses those junk tokens once again, making red mana from Rose and exiling some cards that he may or may not get to play. He's thrilled that he found a Heroic Intervention and a Tamiyo's Safekeeping, which don't do almost anything for him right now. But using his last junk token, he finds a Farseek, so there's that. He then uses some of that mana he's been producing and his forest to cast it. And with that Farseek, he'll grab a Commercial District, entering the battlefield tapped, but he does get to surveil one. He decides to keep that on top. He moves into his end step. Fevered Visions will trigger, so he'll draw that and take 2. Enthusiastically, I get a token on my end step. Then on my turn, I draw and play that second forest and cast a Farmer Cotton, hoping to gum up the board by dropping 6 halflings and 6 food tokens. If I could get Baylen out next turn, I'll be in business. So I put those tokens out, and then I move into combat, swinging at Kyle once again with my Keeper of the Accord, as well as that soldier token I made on Kyle's end step. So I attack into him, dropping him to 19, and then I pass the turn over to Chris. On my end step, Fevered Visions triggered, I drew a card and lost 2. Chris plays a Foreboding Ruins as his land, and then he casts his commander once again, Nekusar the Mind Razor. With that out, he moves into his end step, drawing a card off of Fevered Visions. Then, onto Scott's turn, he starts taking some damage when he draws. He moves right into combat. Once again, I'm randomly selected by his commander attack. Kyle, before damage, casts Beast Within, targeting Ishai. And Scott's Sadness hits the stack as that creature dies. But hey, you get a 3/3 beast, so that's pretty good. After that, but before damage is dealt, he casts Great Train Heist. He pays for the first instance of Spree, so he'll untap all of his creatures, and he gets a second combat step after this one. So Sheldon punches me down to 18. Scott then goes into a second combat step, and you'll never guess who gets randomly attacked.
All right, I'm dead.
Yeah, that's you, actually, yeah.
That is. What are you gonna do?
Hang on, just to show it on screen.
Yeah, so that happened. We typically use a dice to determine those kinds of things. Kyle was 1 and 2, I was 3 and 4, Chris was 5 and 6, and a 4 came up. So I'm knocked out of the game. Scott then moves to his end step, draws, gets pinged by Fever Divisions as well as Nekusar. Then he passes over to Kyle. Again, he draws and gets pinged as well. He found a land among those cards, so he gets to play a mountain as his land for turn. Then he casts Gratuitous Violence. This'll have his stuff deal double the damage to a permanent or a player. Then he casts Gimli's Reckless Might as well. And again, because it's his turn, those things turn into creatures with haste and indestructible. He moves into combat. Gimli's Reckless Might will trigger, allowing him to fight that beast token on Scott's board. Before damage, Scott attempts to cast Into the Flood Maw and bounce Bello, but Kyle has a response in the form of a Bolt Bend. This allows Kyle to change the target of that bounce spell, and he has Nekusar get bounced back to Chris's hand, removing his only blocker. And with that, Kyle has free reign to smash in enough damage to knock both of his opponents out of the game. And before that happens, Chris cracks into his commander sphere and gets to draw a land. Congratulations, Kyle. Job well done piloting Bello. Pretty sure you've won like 3 games in a row though, dog. I'm thinking grudge match. Anyways, as promised, here's Meatball. He's so chunky. And here he is playing with his favorite catnip banana. And there you have it, that's the game. Please let us know what you thought about the game in the comments. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, thank you for watching.